Buying land is a big deal, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. It might be something that you've been dreaming about and researching for months, even years, and it's possible that you don't feel like you're any closer to becoming a landowner today than you were when you started. In today's episode, we're going to help you get clear on why you're actually buying land, as well as answer the questions you should actually be asking, and we're going to share some personal stories of ours from the land business. Whether you're buying a homestead, an agricultural property, an investment farm, or a recreational tract, we're here to help. This is Land Your Ground, the video podcast for landowners and dreamers. I'm your host, Chase Burns, a full-time real estate broker who specializes in land and rural properties in the Midwest. And my guest today is Jackie Burns, an entrepreneur, homesteader, former ag teacher, my real estate business partner, and wife. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our future content. And if you know somebody who's early in their land journey, share this with them so that we can help get them on the right path. Let's jump in. Today's episode is Getting Started Buying Land. This is episode 13. Jackie and I are here to help you guys. We're going to talk about how to get started, what the first steps are. In a previous episode, we talked about buying land and getting yourself financially ready. This is a little bit more about getting clear about what you actually want out of a property, right, Jack?
Correct.
Identifying the why is step one, right? We want to make our list with our spouse or just sit down with pen and pad and we'll type this out and just draw out the list of reasons that you want to own land, whether that's lifestyle, whether it's financial investment, you just think it's going to be a great strategy for building wealth, or recreation, you're just, you're a big hunter and you're tired of battling with leases or sharing ground with other people or losing property. There's a lot of different reasons. So getting clear on the why is step one, right?
Right. So you need to sit down, come up with a plan, research, because that's, I think, the biggest downfall is a lot of people don't research and get enough information going into it. And they just start looking at properties. They think they kind of know what they want. And when it really boils down to it, whatever type of ground it is and whatever type of property you're looking at purchasing, they don't necessarily have all of the details that they need to going into actually contacting somebody and actually looking at properties.
Yeah. Yep. And we're going to boil it down to 4 categories of different types of land purchases that generally we deal with, or that people that are clients or friends or, other landowners in this area, people that we've already had on as past guests. The reasons that they buy land generally kind of fall into one of these 4 categories. So those are what we're going to hit on today. And the first one is homesteading or country living, just that rural lifestyle. They're just moving from city, moving from suburbia, or they grew up on a farm, they went to college, they bounced around or whatever. They're looking for the forever home and they want some space.
Right. And it depends on what we're going to talk about how many acres, what your plan is. The first step we would tell you to do is think big. That doesn't necessarily mean that first property that you buy. I mean, if it's your homestead, you're going to be a little more tied to it. But
don't limit yourself on the footprint.
Don't necessarily limit yourself. But the number of acres you're going to be able to buy might be smaller if the house you want is larger. So when you're determining the type of property you're going to be purchasing, if you're looking at a homestead, then you're going to have a balance. With homesteads, you're going to have a house on it. Or if it's starting with raw land and you're going to need to put a house on it.
Right, to build from scratch.
Right. Older farmhouse, or if it's a mid-century home, or if you're building a new property, a new house, farmhouse, or a barn-dough, different things like that. Knowing what you're comfortable with on how much actual acreage you're going to need, and are you okay with living in a smaller house because you have more acreage, right, or you still want a 4,000 square foot house or something really big,
right.
Your budget might not allow for as much acreage. So for us, our house might not be as big because we wanted more acreage. And we built that way. And we originally, and we talked about this in a previous podcast, but we originally built a really small house. It was a little over 1,000 square feet. We've added on to that a little bit now. It's still not a huge house, but because we wanted more land.
Yeah. So beginning with the end in mind and then trying to rough out some sort of an all-in budget, whether that means, okay, we're going to buy something that's turnkey, has the house and buildings kind of already on it. Maybe we do a little bit of work or put a little bit of money in to kind of make it our own. But then knowing like, okay, here's our total budget and this is the type of house with, if you need, after going through some of these bullet points that we're going to talk on, if you figure out that you need 20 acres, then in your area, how much is 20 acres of that type of land kind of costing? And then how much money do you have left in your budget that can go towards house and buildings? And if you figure out that, gosh, we need at least 40 or 50 or 80 acres or whatever for what we want to do, then it's going to affect how much house you can afford. So you just kind of have to play with those numbers a little bit beginning with the end in mind, and then figure out, does that house really give us what we want? Or is having a nicer house really so important to us that we would love to have 60 or 80 acres, but we're going to have to be happy with 25.
Right. And like in our previous podcast, we were mainly talking about, we had one reel that has really hit hard, and people are a little upset about it because we were talking raw land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Raw land means there is no house, sometimes there's some improvements, but a lot of times you don't have a well, you don't have, in our area, typically everybody is on a well, you might not have electricity, you're on a septic. Some areas are different. You might be able to get city water and things like that, but not only, you're going to have the cost of the land, if you're building, the cost of the land, you're going to have the cost of improvements, and those can be major.
Yeah. Yeah, they add up pretty fast.
In our area, a well is
20 plus thousand now.
Right.
Yeah. For a deep well would be 500 plus feet. Used to be, when we put ours in 12 years ago or so, it was like $21 a foot to have the well drilled. And now it's up to almost $40, I think. That's
a major expense.
Mm-hmm.
So in our previous episode, we were talking about you could get 40 acres for $250,000 in this area, potentially. Like, it depends on what type of ground. We're not talking tillable farm ground. We're talking a little bit rougher, has some timber.
Yeah, rolling rough pasture ground, stuff that's not suitable to be farmed.
Correct.
Because in this area, most of Illinois, northern half Illinois, and most of Iowa and Midwestern states, if it's suitable for farming, it's anywhere from $8,000 to $25,000 an acre. So if we're looking at some rougher pieces that are suitable for homesteading, great for pasture for animals, maybe some of it can be flat enough to be mowed and put, into hay and that sort of thing, but lower quality productivity soils.
Right. Our farm is a little over 50 acres. And a lot of timber, so a lot of timber soils, clay soils. We don't have the best growing soil. We struggle. We have a fruit orchard. Our trees are not near as good as if we were planting them somewhere else. They're definitely taking a couple more years to, even with us mulching and fertilizing and things like keeping them going. They struggle a little bit. Right. And our garden beds are the same way. We are not growing bumper crops of potatoes in our clay soil.
Yeah. So step one, when we go back to, if we're looking at homesteading or country living, is figuring out how much land do you actually need? Once we talked about the why, what are the reasons that you're buying land? If hunting is also going to happen on this homestead, you're going to need more land. You're going to need at least 15 to 20 plus acres of huntable land, aside from just the homestead area. And I'm going to say that probably is a minimum in most Midwestern states. Right. If you're in a more open area, you're further out west, you're Nebraska or Kansas or someplace, you're not going to be hunting a whole lot on 20 acres. No. It lays different.
And 20 acres, even here, 20 acres for hunting ground, unless you just have all timber around you and there aren't any other houses, you're going to struggle. Because we'll talk about that a little more in one of our other areas, but... Yep.
The other important factors determining how much land you need is just figuring out, if you want to have animals, what kind of animals?
I would say, I think this is the biggest misconception when people are talking about homesteading. You can have a great homestead, growing your own foods, things like that, even in town. You can have a couple of chickens in some areas. You can have a good garden. But when we get into larger livestock, I feel like there's some misconceptions in that, and people do not understand. Like, if you live in town and you live on a quarter acre, like 3 acres sounds like a lot.
Perspective.
So we were talking about like some of the best ways to go figure out how much you really need. Like, just researching what amount of ground some animals take. So like if you're planning on larger livestock like cattle and horses, you're going to need at least 2 acres per animal in most areas. And that's with still supplementing with hay. Like if you only have 2 acres per animal, you're still going to have mud. You're still going to have bugs. Like it's
not going to be beautiful and green and lush all year.
No. And that's really at a minimum. I mean, you can do it smaller, but they're not comfortable, and you might not like the aesthetics of it. If you're having goats and sheep, you can look at more like a quarter of an acre per animal.
So maybe 4 animals per acre.
Right. Pigs you can do on smaller ground. So a lot of people are foraging pigs now. The complications with that can be your fence is going to have to be a lot better. Like pigs get out of everything. Same with goats. If you have electric fence, it works. They kind of respect those boundaries a little more.
Yeah.
But
maybe like 5 to 10 pigs per acre if you have
in a
with natural forages. But they're gonna root stuff up and they're gonna tear up the ground.
If you only have 3 acres, your entire property is 3 acres, and you're thinking you're gonna have a dairy cow and you're gonna have pigs and you're gonna have chickens, like you're gonna have a lot of mud and a lot of manure and a lot of flies
and a lot of hay waste.
Right.
Yeah, which when they're eating hay, they kind of ruin a small area around it because they're stringing out so much hay residue that it chokes out all the grass, and it becomes hard to manage and keep it looking like you would want, or keep the animals in a good, clean environment.
Right. So we're not discouraging smaller acre parcels for animals. We just want everybody to have a good reality, because right now I think social media, you see all of these reels or videos of like, oh, my wife every week brings home a new animal. Like, that's all right. Yeah, like that's all right, except to what extent are you making it to the point where you're almost hoarding animals? Because it's a reality that these animals, they're not comfortable. Like if you have 5 horses on 2 acres because you just keep bringing home animals, like that's not necessarily...
No, just because you can doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Right, and it's not necessarily fair to the animals.
Right. So if you're still in the planning phases of trying to figure out how much space do you really need for what your dream reality is, what lifestyle it is that you're trying to create with this land that you're going to buy, then just plan accordingly and know how much acreage it takes to do it right.
Yep.
That's the take home there, I think, right?
Correct.
So another good way to do that would be just go visit some hobby farms, go visit some homesteads, and take some notes, like how many goats or sheep do they have, how many cattle, how many horses, how many whatever, and figure out if those are the types of animals that you want and you really like the way it looks, or you say, wow, they have 2 horses, they have 3 cows, and they have 6 sheep here, and then they have a small chicken coop. And you start looking at it and you're like, this place is cool because it has the animals I want, but it's kind of a hot mess.
Right. Or
it might be too small.
But also ask questions, because, okay, so there's some local orchards or different places that like touristy type attractions around here, nice farms that have animals. So they might have some ponies that the kids ride. They have some goats. They have some chickens, and they're up in smaller pens for their fall season for 2 to 3 months.
It's a petting zoo environment, not a year-round farm.
So
is
like
what you're
asking, this might not necessarily be where they live all year round.
Right.
So asking like good questions of how big of a space do you really run these animals on? Because it doesn't look like that much space necessarily, but they might have 40 acres out back that they turn those animals on 9 months out of the year. Yeah.
So then aside from just like asking those questions, do an interview with some of those property owners. That would be awesome. But then even just visually take it in and say, okay, this place really is set up nice. I love the way it looks. They've got a couple paddocks here that they rotate. They kick, their 5 cows or whatever in this, or their 2 horses and a pony they put in this pasture, and then they move them to this one. And here's their lot up around the barns, and and look at it and say, this has all the right size buildings that I'd want. I don't need more animals than this. And then get an app on your phone, either like Onyx Hunt or Hunt Stand, or you can even use like just Google Earth, when you get home and pull it up on a laptop or something, and map out, drop the pins around the perimeter of what that property was and measure the acreage. Because I think most beginners, most people looking for their first piece, do not have a good concept of how big an acre is.
Right.
So
and 4 acres, especially when you first buy it, if you have no animals and you first buy 4 acres, you're like, this is so much ground. Mm-hmm. And it is if you only want like a horse and some chickens and a dog. Like 4 acres is a lot. You can do a lot on 4 acres. And that's awesome if that's the end goal.
Yeah.
Or if that's where you're starting. I mean, there's a lot of people that start in one area, and maybe eventually you can add ground around it, or you maybe eventually upgrade into something different. But I think another part of your research and asking is feed costs. So we're not going to get deep into feed costs today, but like when you look and you're like, oh, I can have a goat or I can have a horse on this acreage, like I don't know that people realize how much hay can cost.
Sure.
Or that you can't necessarily get hay in your area. Like we are very lucky. We're in central Illinois, west central Illinois, and hay for the most part is fairly easy for us to get. Part of it is we know quite a few people that produce hay, but also we've had a couple of good years.
Right.
And we tend to have quite a bit. But if you're in the South, like they're talking prices on hay down there. Some of it's $25 a square bale. I'm talking like
a 50 to 60 pound square bale.
Right. That would feed 1 to maybe 2 horses a day. So knowing how much you're going to have to be feeding every day. So you might be spending like in the South or in some of these areas that hay is not as prevalent. You might be spending $25 a day on a bale of hay. That's significant. In our area, hay is closer to like $6 a bale, which is
yes,
still...
You can buy round bales if you have a tractor to handle them and to feed them. And it is cheaper, but it also, certain horses like alpacas and horses don't do great on round bales. And, cattle and sheep, goats might do fine on it. So there's a certain kind of knowing what types of forage the livestock that you're going to purchase, that'll help you determine what type of barn you got to have. If you're going to need a loader tractor to be able to handle big bales, or if you're going to do it all in small squares, and the cost difference between feeding small squares and feeding bigger round bales or big squares is substantial. Okay. So some of the other types of activities that you're going to do on this homestead that would also weigh into like, how much acreage do we need? Do you really enjoy cutting firewood? Do you want to heat your home with firewood? Then it might be reasonable to say, well, we need to buy, something that has at least a 25% component of woods, or someplace that, we can cut some trees and stockpile some firewood and heat our house, heat our shop or whatever with, the workshop, something like that with firewood. It takes more space, and there is some potential cost savings long-term if you like to do those sort of things. But if it is, you just kind of have to work that into the why you're buying land from the get-go, and make sure that the type of land that you have has enough acreage, and that it also consists of enough timber versus open land for those types of things. There's one more thing on this homestead before we move on to the next category, land, is something new that keeps coming up. I have more and more people calling and asking about it. The family compound. When I first said that to Jackie, I said, the family compound. She's like, don't call it that. It sounds weird. I'm like, I didn't make the term up, right? This is a thing now. It's out there.
And it sounds so idealistic.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going a different direction with that.
I mean...
It does. It does. I agree, because I think the people who love the idea of that, they hear that and they're like, oh, that'd be amazing. I would love to buy one piece of land and put up multiple houses on it. This is what we're talking about, by the way. If you don't know what a family compound is, we're talking about a piece of land that you can build multiple residences on and then have certain parts of the property that are kind of just used communally.
I mean, we talked about this 20 years ago in college with some of our friends.
Yeah.
We
They were like family to us.
Yeah,
right?
and we all wanted to raise our kids together and live in the same area and
do life together.
And it was really comical because we had one of our friends, she lived in town, and she was like, "You mean like a cul-de-sac?" We're like, no, that's not quite what we were meaning. And then some other terms got thrown out there, and then
like a cult.
Yeah, that got weird. We're like, nope, we want to live in the same area.
Yes,
so
we just want to be neighbors.
Yeah,
don't make it weird. Yeah. So, but the concept basically stems back to what farmsteads used to be. Was somebody would buy a piece of land, build one house, and then as their children grew and got married, they were all working on the same piece of land, and they maybe would build a house right next door or build a house just across the road or on the adjacent tract or whatever. And then you would have a whole network of related family people that are all just like helping each other.
Right.
You know, as mom and dad get older, you live right there close to them, you can help them. As you are a young family and you have youngsters, you know, children that grandma and grandpa are right there to help watch them, and everybody gets the benefits of being in close
community,
connected. Yes,
I
community.
think is like,
thank you.
That was the word we really were searching for.
Not a cul-de-sac, not a cult. It's a community.
Compound even seems a little weird. So I like community.
Right.
But I think
there are drawbacks though.
There are
potentially.
Well, I think as long as you're setting it up and you are real about it when you start, it can be a good thing.
Yeah, it could be a terrific thing. Right.
It's just making sure when you are purchasing property, when you're going into it, that everybody has really like open eyes to like what the potential drawbacks down the road could be.
Yeah. And so just to point a couple of them out, if this is something that's on your radar and you're like, oh no, we've been talking about that at all of our family functions. Like, I think we're going to try to make this happen. Issue number one that most of the people I talk with are like, oh, I really hadn't considered that. They're looking at buying a parcel of land, and then mom or dad are going to build a house on it, and then some of the other children are maybe going to build 2 or 3 other multiple residences around them, and they have a good idea of what type of land they think they would want for that plan. But what they hadn't really thought about is somebody's going to buy the land, but then let's say one of our parents bought a tract of land and we wanted to build a house on it next to their house. For us to go and get a mortgage, go get a loan from a bank for us to construct a home on it, we're going to have to own the land.
Right.
A bank is not going to be good with you borrowing money to build on land that you don't own, because then they have it just wouldn't work. They won't let that happen.
Right.
So you're going to have to survey off and what's called subdivide that parcel for each of those residences to be built on it. And again, this goes back to building or starting with the end in mind. The end, guys, gals, is that none of us live forever. So at some point, if you have multiple families all on this compound, the same piece of property, sooner or later, mom and dad are going to pass away, or John and Susie are going to get divorced or get a job somewhere out of state and have to relocate or something. One of those houses is going to become vacant. What's the plan? Do we then have it sold?
And it's setting everybody up for success. So having them subdivided or having good contracts in place, which you're like, oh, well, it's my parents and my sibling. We don't need a contract.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the biggest things that we see in real estate is, especially towards the end of life, families get messy. Mm-hmm. And I don't think nobody seeks out to be in that position, but inevitably somebody's feelings get hurt, or somebody thinks
there's a disagreement
that they owned more ground than the other person, or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And so setting this whole situation up for success so that either you and your siblings, or you and your parents, or you and eventually like your kids are clear on what everybody owns, what the future of it looks like, so that there aren't disagreements down the road. Yeah.
And you also have to have it set up, even if a bank loan is not an issue, if you're in a position that you can do it financially without having to worry about whether or not a bank is going to loan to let you do that. So you go ahead and build on this property. Like you said, you need a plan, because eventually one of these properties might have to be parceled off. One of the residences, something might have to happen.
Right.
Otherwise, who are you going to put in it? You're going to rent it out and have somebody else living amongst you or whatever. You're
Right.
gonna
Well, and
maintain
I saw one on Instagram the other day, and it had like a pool in the center, and there were 2 or 3 houses branched off of it, and it looked awesome. And so but then if you think about that, like, okay, if one of those houses has to be sold, who's moving into that house? Who are you okay with moving into that house? Like, if you're okay with sharing your pool and yard with any random person that your sibling decides to sell the house to, I guess that's okay. But thinking through those things ahead of time.
Yeah. No, definitely a lot to go through, and definitely helps to be working with a broker or somebody who's well-versed in what subdivision takes, like how many acres is required in your county or in your area, your parish, or whatever state you're in, that because there are some restrictions on that. Just knowing that, like, what are our options down the road should one of these siblings or somebody decide, okay, we have to sell this part, we have to move, we have to whatever. So, but it's a cool concept, and I think, something we can get behind. We've thought about years back down the road, thought it would be a cool thing to do. The next category of land that we really wanted to touch on is agricultural. Agricultural in this area obviously is huge, but for the purposes of this, like buying land, starting out type of video in this podcast, we want to focus mostly on the beginners. So this is not so much for row crop and livestock operations of much size, like bigger operations. They require a lot of land. And there's a whole lot of dynamics and choosing parcels and logistics of all that. So for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to stay focused on the beginners, the people just starting out, the people who want to start either a hobby farm or ranch, or they want to get into farming and ranching, but this is tract 1.
Right.
And some of the important things to, what would be one topic or tip that we could hit on there that's going to help those people, a road that we've explored and kind of been down before.
It's financing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the biggest question. That's the biggest hurdle for anybody starting on buying their first piece of property, starting a farm, is unless you just have cash, what is the best avenue of financing? Because going to your local bank is typically not going to be an avenue you're going to be able to do.
It's going to be hard because they're going to want 25 to 30% down. And that's a big chunk of money for a lot of young people, a lot of beginners, a lot of first-time property buyers. You don't have a lot of other hard assets a lot of times. So one program that we have shared with many people or talk often about or gets brought up in conversation is the FSA Beginning Farmer and Rancher Loans. The Farm Service Agency, FSA, has multiple programs put together for either direct farm loans or beginning farmer rancher loans that they have different requirements, different qualification requirements. So it's not going to be for everybody. There's a few hurdles to cross.
You're not going to be able to step into that immediately. You're not going to be able to, unfortunately.
Right.
Having a background in it, having education in it, that can lessen the time that you have, lessen the qualifications.
Right. Because one of the requirements is to have a minimum of 3 years of substantial participation in a farming or ranching operation.
Right.
So if you're not already farming, this is one of the first questions we had. It's like, well, how do you get a loan to begin farming to buy a piece of land but you're already supposed to be farming when you go to get the loan? You can rent a piece of ground. If you're going to have livestock, you could do something like that, and you could buy some livestock and you could start into it to build some Schedule F, build some history so that I'm a farmer rancher now and I'm dipping my toes into it. I'm trying to grow my operation. Now I require
it might be that you're renting hay ground and you're raising hay, if that's one of your end goals, or raising livestock.
Right. And this would just be for the beginning farmer and rancher loans that we're talking about. They also have direct farm ownership loans. The big benefit to these folks is that you're either looking at longer term 30 and 40 year type loans, or you're looking at much cheaper interest rates.
Right.
So these
are federal programs that you're getting into, and they're supporting those because they want to see new farmers and ranchers.
Right. We have to, because the average age of farmers and ranchers in the United States just continues to climb. There's not enough succession of younger people getting into it, and so this is one of the few things our government does that we're actually I think we're wholeheartedly in support of. It's a good program. But there's also guaranteed loans, which basically you're going to put, let's say 5% of the down payment on a property down, and then the FSA is going to guarantee a loan for 45%, and then you're going to get your other 50% of the financing either through a commercial lender, a bank, or a private loan from somebody else, perhaps. So that's an option also, and that's like a 2.5% interest on the portion of the FSA loan. Some of the other loans can be anywhere from like 1.5% to 2.5%.
And some of those fluctuate too. Like
Right.
some of them are a fixed interest rate. Some of them fluctuate with the market.
And some of them will be a set amount, like 4% below whatever the market
Correct.
is. So if the market is 7, you might be at 3. So, but still, it's a dramatic savings, especially if you're stretching your loan out for 30 or 40 years. It will save you a ton of money on interest over trying to get into
Well,
it.
and especially right now, as interest rates are 7.5+%.
Yeah. So definitely something to dig more into. There's information on the web about it. But if you learning the first requirements so that you know what steps you have to take to position yourself to even qualify to use those programs.
Because it might not be immediate.
Yeah.
Like
It's a longer term play.
Correct. There's lots of people that have been looking into that for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
The catch on that a little bit is to continue to qualify for beginning farmer. So you have a minimum potentially of 3 years and a maximum of 10 years.
Yeah. If you've been doing it more than 10 years, you're no longer a beginner.
So then you're like kind of banking on a property that fits your needs coming up in that 3 to 10 year
right. That 7-year window.
range. Yeah.
Potentially. Also still in the agricultural category, you've got people who are interested in starting a farm because they want to grow some sort of a specialty crop. Maybe they grow produce, or they want to have like a U-pick farm, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, you name it, peaches, apples, those types of things. They want to, have a pumpkin patch or have something that's a little bit more of a seasonal commodity and niche for their area. And I'd say the biggest things for those people to really look at and consider is like, know your product, research as much as you possibly can about what it is you're going to grow, become an expert in that before you think about what parcel to buy, because there's a lot to know there that like, if you're going to grow blueberries, you need to be looking in areas that have the right soil alkalinity, or if you want to grow watermelons and muskmelons and cucumbers and those types of things.
Clay soils are not going to.
No, you need to find sand, right?
Right.
And somewhere that you can irrigate like crazy. And sweet corn could do well in an area like that too. But so you need to really focus on or figure out what types of crops am I going to become an expert in and raise and really enjoy and take to market and make money at it, if that's your goal, whatever. And then not just what type of land is required for that commodity, but then geographically, how are you going to market it? Where are you going to take it to sell? Are there any farmers markets in this geographic area? If you're looking in this county, but you have to drive all the way 2 counties over to take all of your produce to get it sold every weekend, maybe you should look closer to the metro area where there's more demand. And so,
but then your ground is going to be higher too.
It generally will be higher.
So it might be that you have to drive a little bit farther. And we find that a lot with more recreational properties. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people, if they're just buying a farm that they don't necessarily live on, it might have to be farther out, or even if they are living on it, they might have a farther commute to be able to afford it.
Yeah.
So a lot of the comments that we get that are like, well, no, it's $20,000 an acre in my area. Like if you're 5 miles out of a metro area, it might be $20,000 an acre.
Yeah.
I mean, you're paying more it's more of a small parcel premium, or even metro area premium,
right,
because you're close to that city.
Supply
Whereas
and demand.
like
so if
we are 40 minutes, 25 minutes from
a
like
medium-sized town and 45 minutes from a big metro.
Correct. And so ground is cheaper when you're that far out, and we don't live on a paved road. Like all of those things come into play in the price.
Yeah, for sure. Not everybody likes to drive on mud, and that's another concern. So let's say you're going to have the type of farm that the customers are going to come to you.
Right.
So this is like
the
experience, right?
No customers would want to be driving to us.
Yeah, if you're going to have a pumpkin patch or an orchard, and you're going to have a kid's playground and some goats and all that kind of fun stuff. And you're an attraction where you're bringing people out there. You're going to have a corn maze, or you're going to do any of that type of stuff. You can't expect everybody's going to be wanting to drive their nice, shiny, detailed cars to take the kids out for the day down some muddy dirt path or whatever. So those are going to affect where you buy land, which will also affect the price. But in your research, go visit some of those types of properties a little bit outside of your geographic area, so that they will feel like maybe they're not your competition, and do your market research by talking to those people, introduce yourself, try to get to know them, and ask questions like, how many visitors do you have a year? And where is the average distance driven by your visitors? Like, where are most of your customers coming from? So if somebody has this type of property that you like, and it's 25 minutes outside of a big metro area, and they say, oh yeah, everybody comes from the metro, that's nothing. 25 minutes, no big deal. Or if, hey, we draw people from an hour, but I'd say half of our people are within 20 minutes, then learn as much as you can about that, so that you really hone in on, like, here's where the market is. Doesn't do you any good to buy a farm, develop it, and have this beautiful idea and make it a wonderful experience for people, and you get a fraction of the visitors every year that you would have had if you had put it in the right spot.
Right.
So be smart about that, do your research, and really figure out, because if you're going to this length and you're buying property, yeah, it could be a little bit more expensive if it were a little bit closer to the metro. But if you're going to do 10 times the amount of revenue every year, then you'd be silly not to do that.
Exactly. Yep. So we're just, again, going back to the right type of property, the right area that you need to be in, and what that location, or if you are okay with staying in, like, let's say if you still have family there and you're okay with staying, you want to stay within an hour distance or 30 minutes or whatever that may be, and your area is high price, like certain areas of Tennessee right now have skyrocketed. And so if you're like, well, no, we could never buy land here because the prices are unrealistic and you're totally wrong and you have no idea what land costs, like, that's for your area. Like, a lot of the information that we give is for potentially, like, mostly our area. I mean, we know prices of different areas within the different markets within the country, but you have to do that research of where you're at.
For sure. And then work with either a rural real estate broker or a land specialist, somebody in that area who's extremely familiar with what the values are. If you're not an expert, understand your limitations, and then, like, get qualified help. Somebody that can be a guide, it can be a teacher, can help you learn the local market in your area and show you comparables and help you weigh out for yourself, am I better off to be 10 miles closer to town and pay 20% more per acre? Is it really going to impact my finances in the end with my business negatively or positively by doing that? And then weigh out all of those decisions.
And obviously we are proponents of real estate agents, but you need to find a good one. Like, yeah, and
they're not all created equally.
Well, and some of them are, if you're somebody that's in more of a city, they might not know any of the markets or anything necessarily, soil types, or if you're going to be able to find hay or things like that. Like,
they won't have those
a rural real
connections.
estate agent might be, will be better off to help you with those things.
And if you're shopping for a FSBO property, that's totally fine. If you find the right property and it's either off market or it's for sale by owner or whatever, and so you're just not working with an agent at the time, I'm not saying don't buy that property. If it's the right property, by all means, but you're at a little bit of a disadvantage. So just understand that, and then know that, like, you need to become the expert. The onus is on you. If you don't have that guide, then you really need to do your due diligence and work really hard in your research and be extremely confident that you're making a good decision.
And have contracts.
Right.
I mean, that's really where we give our clients the best value, is making sure they know what they're buying, making sure that contracts are in place, because that can make or break a property. Like, if you don't know what contracts you need going into it, and you don't have anybody in your court, then you could be buying a house that has a foundation that's falling in that you might not know about, or you could be buying a property that has mine subsidence on it and you're not going to be able to get insurance. Like, there's a lot of things out there that real estate brokers help protect you from.
There's a lot of potential exposure to liability.
Right.
Yeah, good points. So next category of land purchases is investments. And this could be tillable farmland. It could be mixed tillable timber pieces. I'm going to just hit on these real quick and just talk some of the high points of each of them. So if you're interested in it just because you're trying to diversify your portfolio and you think, I've got some extra money here and I feel like land is a great long-term, very secure investment. And it is. It has been for forever, really. But in the history of this country, the demand for land continues to grow as our population continues to grow. There's urban sprawl. So there's actually, not only are we not making any more land, but there's less of it available every single year just because it gets consumed and covered in concrete. We're looking at buying tillable farmland. If you look at high percentage tillable tracts, they're going to be higher priced. It would be a better investment for a long-term hold. Typically, they're going to have a little bit lower ROI annually, but they have a higher rate of appreciation annually, which means the land itself goes up in value each year. It gains faster rate. Even though it might return, you're going to pay a premium for it, and it only cash rents or only produces so much revenue. So you might not net as much of a return annually on the high percentage, higher quality tillable type farmland tracts, but there's still a great investment for longer term holds, buying Class A, Class B tillable ground. Mixed tillable or timber tracts. So this would be more like moderate priced, maybe not quite as high. You're not going to pay the serious premium for that type of land. It's fine for medium or long-term holds. They're better ROI annually typically. They don't rent for that much less money than the really expensive stuff does, but they also don't gain as high of a rate of appreciation annually.
But also they might have opportunity for diversification of income, because you might be able to get a hunting lease. Like, if you're not interested in hunting it,
Yep.
You might be able to get a hunting lease on it.
Timber production, you might be able to harvest some logs every 5, 6, 8 years, something like that. So
Right.
other
CRP income.
They're usually, mixed tracts generally have multiple revenue streams, which is why you can get a higher annual return out of those properties.
Right.
They just maybe, so you, instead of getting a 1.5 to 2% ROI, maybe you're getting 3 or 4, maybe even if you factor in your hunting lease and timber production spread out over time, you might end up with like 5.5% annual ROI, but it might only be gaining at 6 to 8% annually in appreciation, where a high quality timber or tillable tract, you might get 1 to 2% ROI, but it's gaining at 10 or 12% annually in appreciation. So they're both still really good investments. You just have to figure out what your risk tolerance is and what's right for you. Timber tracts that either have no tillable or a very low amount of tillable, they're going to be much cheaper. It's great for short or middle term holds, but somewhat more volatile in appreciation rates and moderate to somewhat higher risk. So some of those can be good buys for an investor, but you really have to know the market for tillable tracts. And then timber tracts become more of like the recreational market, which we're going to talk about next. But the recreational market is kind of like the fine art market. Doesn't feel like it. I'm buying timber. I'm cultured.
Yeah.
No, they compare the two together because they both align really well with the economy. So if the economy is really, really strong, people are making a lot of money in the stock market, they're very comfortable putting it into timbered or recreational type parcels.
Right.
But the minute the stock market starts to slip and go down and they're losing money in the market, people back out and they say, I'm not buying a piece of timberland that doesn't have any immediate return.
Right. If it doesn't have any active income.
Yeah. So the market goes up and down a lot more over time on timbered tracts than it does on tillable farmland, which generally is in an upward, maybe a more stable market, and it might have some plateaus, it might have slight dips, but it continues to trend upward, not so much up and down. So again, it just goes back to risk. But the final part of the investment category is going to be people who are trying to develop ground. And those might be people who are just trying to buy something raw, build a road in it, clear a building site, and then flip it. Or it might be that somebody's going to build something like a campground or some other type of business that they're going to hold and operate. And those are all things that we can get into more in future episodes. But They're kind of its own niche for land investors.
Right.
Recreational land.
So, this is a large percentage of what we sell, like homesteads, recreational, and then also a lot of tillable investment, farm ground. But recreational ground, typically, most times it's raw ground. Sometimes it'll have a cabin, something like that on it. People are looking for, but then they're looking for a property that they can enjoy.
It's a lifestyle purchase.
Right. With whether it be with their family, whether they just enjoy hunting by themselves, that's like their getaway property. And taking it out and being able to enjoy that long term. But these are also the properties that you can grow into. So a lot of times when people buy recreational properties, they might start out with a 20 to a 40 that's in their price range, maybe a starter farm, or and then can grow into a different property. So starting out with a smaller farm, as long as you know what your boundaries, I guess, are on that, is there are a lot of benefits to that.
Yeah.
It gets you comfortable with that amount of ground. It gets you maybe ground closer to home potentially.
Might not be the dream property, but it checks a lot of boxes and gets you into a farm that you can start to enjoy. You can start to build some equity in, right?
So what are some things, though, that we need to be careful with on those smaller parcels?
So you're going to pay generally a little bit higher price per acre. Anything sub 40 acres in this area and most of the Midwest is going to be a little bit pricier on a per acre basis than the same type of land would be in like a 60, 80, 160 acre type parcel. So you pay a little bit more of a premium for it when you buy it because it's affordable to more people. Supply and demand.
Right.
Deeper buyer pool equals higher prices. So that's the first thing to kind of be aware of. Doesn't mean, oh, don't buy that. I need to buy more so that I get more bang for my buck. Well, that'd be great. But the reality is it's okay to buy something that has a little bit more of a small parcel premium, because guess what? When you resell it, it still carries that same differential. So if you paid more per acre for it as a 20 acre tract, when you go to sell it, you're going to get more for it than you would if it were a 40 or 60. So that'd be the first thing. But the bigger thing is like, it goes back to what is our why? Why are we buying? How are we going to use it? How many people, how many hunters are we actually going to have on this piece of property? Are we hunting just me and my brother and we're really serious bow hunters? Or do we each have 3 kids and my wife hunts too? And, so we're looking for more of a family property. In that case, you want a property maybe that's going to hold a lot of white-tailed deer or a lot of turkeys or, maximum opportunity, a game-rich environment, as opposed to looking for something that's just like serious trophy potential. I'm only maybe going to shoot 1 or 2 deer a year. I don't turkey hunt. We tread really light on the property. Knowing your priorities, understanding what class of trophy you're after if you're a big deer hunter, not just that this area has a lot of deer, but can it consistently produce the quality of deer that we're after? And if you don't know the area really well, you don't know a lot of landowners in that area, then you do well to work with a real estate broker who specializes in that type of property or has a lot of experience there. And the key thing I would say about finding the right broker to work with is find somebody who's trustworthy.
Yeah, even if it takes interviewing people, getting on the phone with them, feeling them out, ask them questions. Like if they're short with you, and I'm not saying that you need to keep them on the phone for like hours, but just have good communication with them. Obviously they're busy people too. And so they don't necessarily have hours to talk about it, but also they should be able to give you some of that information that you need.
Yeah. So you want to find somebody that has great reputation, somebody, a lot of testimonials or that sort of thing. Talk to some other people who've bought land in that area. Who did they use or whatever, but really get a good feel for that, because you're looking for somebody who isn't just going to fluff something to sell a piece of property. And I'm almost ashamed to say in our industry that there's people that do that, and they give all agents or all brokers kind of a bad name. But if you're looking to purchase outside of your immediate geographic area and you don't know who to work with, then reach out.
Right.
We can help connect you with somebody.
Geographic area is the next question. So we get a lot of clients that call looking to purchase, because ground is really, I mean, we live in an area that has really good whitetails, large whitetails, but also it's a little cheaper than a metro area. And so they purchase here, and it's like 3.5 hours from home. And then they call a year or two later and they're like, I actually never get down there. Like, it's just far enough that we don't ever make that trip. We only got down there once last year or whatever, because you're busy.
Yeah. And everybody's radius is going to be different.
Correct.
Like, some people will buy in Missouri, or they'll figure out 5-6 hours from home. They thought that would be fine. And then they're like, it's way too far. And then I need to cut that distance in half. And so then they call us because they're searching and they want to be in 2-hour range or 3-hour range or something.
Right. And that's, I mean, it's going to be dependent on the property. If you have a property that's 3 or 4 hours away, you want to make sure, like, it might have to have a small cabin on it, or you might want to make sure that there's somewhere to stay close by to your property. There's a lot of properties around here. We don't have necessarily hotels that are within 25 minutes or someplace people are going to want to stay. So
if it's far enough from home that you're not just making a day trip there and back, then you're going to need some accommodations.
Right.
So buy somewhere that there's something available. Touched on all 4 of the categories of property that people are buying here locally. So that would be your homestead type properties, your agricultural, niche market, commodity type properties, investment type properties, developing or just long-term holds and building wealth that way, and then recreational. And what were your major takeaways here from this discussion? What are we hoping that we drive this point home to our viewers?
I think the three key components of this are: find your why, research, and plan. So developing that plan from the beginning and thinking big, especially if you're looking at homesteading or a recreational property, looking at those properties, drawing out like long-term what you want to develop them into and what your needs are. So
awesome.
Going back full circle to your why.
Yep. And then along with that, just figuring out your financing, which if you want a little bit more detail on that, we talked a lot about how to financially prepare yourself for the purchase in the previous part of this buying land series, and that was buying land and building a better marriage. So especially if you're working with a spouse and you guys are shaping this dream up together and you're researching, you're trying to figure all this stuff out. If you hadn't seen it, go back and watch episode 12 with Jackie and I. Encourage you guys to go back and check out that episode. I want to thank Jackie for being in studio with me again today, and we appreciate you guys very much. But like and subscribe to join our tribe, and watch us next time here on Land Your Ground.